morning and welcome to Skipton Baptist Church Online. We're continuing our series on practicing the way, and today we're going to be focusing on the practice of generosity. And although there are many ways in which we can be generous, including the many ways in which we serve others that we looked at last week, the focus of this practice is specifically on how we view and use our money and possessions. As in other weeks in this series, we thought it'd be really good to hear from a couple of our deacons. First, we're going to hear from Joe Nixon, our church treasurer, as we thought it'd be a good opportunity to update you all on our finances and to thank you for your generous giving over the past year. Then we're going to hear from Uriana Boye, another one of our deacons who feels passionately about the importance of the practice of generosity and giving.
Hello, I'm Jo, the treasurer here at Skipton Baptist, working as part of a brilliant team who keep our finances running smoothly. It's great to have the opportunity to talk to you today, especially as I'm away this weekend so I can't be at church in person. But it's so good to take time to look back and see how God has blessed our finances over the past year. Firstly, a reminder that we as a church are almost entirely self-funded. The exception being our food bank, which receives a lot of external donations for which we are very grateful. That means all our expenditure is covered by donations from our church family. This includes paying our ministers and staff, running our buildings, loan repayments for the house, funding our many ministries, and external donations. Secondly, a reminder that whenever we talk about giving, it's on the understanding that everyone's circumstances are different. We don't want to guilt trip anyone, and we leave it up to each person to discern what God is calling them to in financial giving. We also recognise that there are many other equally valuable ways to give. I spoke last year about how our expenditure was exceeding our income, mainly due to our loan repayments. And I'm really delighted to let you know now that our loan balance has reduced in the last year from 380,000 to 305,000. And we're expecting to finish 2025 with a similar bank balance to how we started the year. This is amazing, and it's due to your generosity in increased regular giving and some one-off gifts. So a huge thank you to all of the around 100 households who give regularly to SBC. I'm sorry I haven't had the time yet to thank people personally for their ongoing giving, but please do know that every gift is seen and hugely appreciated. However, our costs are increasing due to inflation. The age of our building means increased repair costs are inevitable. And as our ministries increase, so do our costs. As Catherine will say, or has said, financial giving is a privilege and a blessing, and we believe that it's part of what it means to follow Jesus. So I would like to ask everyone in our church family listening today to prayerfully consider their giving. If you have been giving the same amount by standing order for a while, could you consider slightly increasing your monthly amount? Or if you're not currently giving financially, could you consider setting up a standing order? Please don't think that what you can give isn't enough to be valuable. Every gift is a blessing and highly valued, whether it's £1 a month or £1,000 a month or any other amount. As always, it's important to say that if your circumstances have changed and you need to decrease your regular giving, please do so. We don't want anyone to give what they cannot afford. There are donation forms at the back of church and details on our website of how to set up a regular gift. Or email me at sbctreasurer@skiptonbaptist.org. Thank you for listening.
So Uriana, thank you so much for offering to share a little bit about generosity with us this morning. Can you tell us a little bit about why you consider it to be such a privilege and blessing to be able to give to others?
Yeah, I think there's several things, but there are three things really that I want to talk about. The first is the fact that it really reflects the character of God. Yeah, God is such a generous God, and we see that through what Christ did for us, coming, giving his life so we can be reconciled to God. So that is our example. The second thing as well that I think is so important when it comes to us being generous is the fact that it's part of our worship. We've got so much to do when it comes to worshiping God, and we've got the examples in the Bible as well. When I think about someone like Abraham giving his all in worship, in terms of the example of him giving his son Isaac, and I think we can use our generosity as a way in which we show our worship to God. And the final thing that I wanted to talk about is the fact that when we are generous, we are really partnering with the great Almighty God to be his, if you like, his hands and his feet in this world, to show forth his generosity as well. So for me, that is a wonderful privilege to be able to do that.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful explanation of that. And can you tell me a little bit about how you see generosity as part of your apprenticeship to Jesus or your walk of discipleship with him?
Yeah. So as I was saying before, God did show us his character through being generous. And I think as disciples of Christ, we ought to follow in his steps and be generous in the way we give. And when we talk about generosity, we're talking about so much more than just giving our money. It's about sharing our resources, sharing our time, our talent. And I think so many in church do that at the moment, giving so many of what they have. But for me, I think that the way we think about giving our money sometimes reflects how we look at generosity. And what do I mean by that? I'm not talking about the amounts we give. I mean, when we look in the Bible, we've got examples of how people gave their money. We've got the widow who gave her mite. And at the other extreme, we've got people like Solomon, or even the lady who saved and bought her jar of alabaster nard. You've got the extremes of what people can give. And as I was saying, it's not about the amounts that we give, but it's about our attitude. And I think for all these people, it was all about how they give wholeheartedly. So we don't want people to think about, oh, how much do I give? But it's about your attitude and your wholeheartedness. And again, going back to the fact that it's not just about money, it's about all that people give. So yeah. And I think in terms of our apprenticeship as well, we it's not too late to start, and it's not too early to start either. We've got our children and young people. Some of us have children, grandchildren, or even if you don't have children in your life, there are children in this church that we can all give the example of, show them the example of how we can give in terms of all those resources. And if they can learn that as they grow up, they will be developing their apprenticeship as well in terms of giving generously.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. That's really helpful again. And I asked you to think about a time when you've either experienced the joy of giving or receiving, or both.
Yeah. I think as I was saying, God has given us so much, even our Christian journeys, because of his generosity. And for me and my family, we have come to realize that what God says in his word about giving and how it's blessed to give, and also the fact that when we give, he blesses us. We've experienced that time and time again. And one example I can give is that in terms of my experience of experiencing the joy of giving, is that because we have been trying to be faithful in our giving, God has blessed us so much. We've never really have to be in great need because God always provides for us. And in terms of the joy of giving myself, one example that I can give is I've got a friend who runs a charity, a small charity that cares for children, and I just felt that I should give to that. And the letter I got back from her just brought me so much joy. She said to me, "You have no idea what you gave achieved." And she told me so many stories, and that sort of made me realize that it's really, really helpful to be generous and to be God's hands and feet.
Thank you. As we've heard from Joe and Uriana, the practice of generosity and our attitude towards our money and resources is a key part of our apprenticeship to Jesus. It's both a real privilege and a blessing to be able to give financially as well as practically to others, no matter how much or how little we have to offer. Yet few of Jesus' teachings are more radical and counterintuitive to the cultural assumptions of our day than what he has to say about money and generosity. We constantly hear we're bombarded by the Western formula of more money equals more happiness. Yet boldly, Jesus claims that happiness is found not in the accumulation of wealth, but in living a deeply relational life of generosity and love. And for Jesus, this wasn't just some peripheral issue. Scholars have estimated that 25% of his teaching and a staggering 50% of his parables are focused on money, generosity, or stewardship. In Acts chapter 20, Luke records that Jesus said it is more blessed to give than to receive. Or as the Message translation puts it, you're far happier giving than getting. There is more joy in giving than receiving. But do we believe that, really? Truly? Or do we just think that while Jesus' teachings on money might be right in telling us how generous we should be, following them can't possibly bring us true happiness? Surely. Can there really be more joy in giving than receiving? We're approaching Christmas, and the classic example of the truth of this in fiction, I think, is illustrated by the character of Ebenezer Scrooge in Dickens' A Christmas Carol, who is initially depicted as living the very opposite of a generous life. He's described, for example, as a tight-fisted, hand-at-the-grindstone Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. Yet by the end of Dickens' tale, Scrooge is transformed from being a greedy, selfish miser to a kind and joy-filled man, such that he describes himself as being as light as a feather, as happy as an angel, as merry as a schoolboy. And all sorts of research by social scientists has shown that generous people are indeed happier, healthier, have lower levels of depression and anxiety, are more interested in personal growth, have better relationships, have a higher life expectancy, and, according to one study, literally laugh more. This is true across every demographic, no matter someone's socioeconomic status, age, gender, ethnicity, personality, and so on. Jesus was right. According to such research, the Jesus formula of more generosity equals more happiness is the pathway to a happy life, not the world's formula of more money equals more happiness. Think for a moment about the most generous person you know. They might not be wealthy, but they're generous to a fault. Are they joyful? Are they joyful? Research would certainly suggest that they are. Whereas news headlines over the years have demonstrated how often the rich and famous end up unhappy despite all the wealth their fame has brought them. The actor Jim Carrey is quoted as saying, "I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer." And of course it is really important to recognise here that while wealth might not buy us happiness, we do need a certain level of money in order to meet our everyday needs and to be able to enjoy life rather than be consumed with worry about where our next meal will come from. So how can we discover and grow the joy of living a generous life, a truly generous life, and an overflow of God's generosity to us, not as something we do just because we feel we should. A biblical theology of generosity starts not with tithing, but before time and space with who God is, Father, Son and Holy Spirit. He's a family of self-giving, other-centered, joyful, sacrificial, generous love. Generosity is grounded in his very nature and is at the heart of the gospel itself, as we read in John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. Generosity should therefore also become part of our very nature, of the attitude of our hearts towards God and others, as we spend time with Jesus and gradually become more like him and learn to do as he did. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal." We all have a deep human desire to store up treasures, and Jesus isn't telling us not to do that, but rather to store up treasures in heaven, because he goes on to say, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. For Jesus, money and our attitude to money is all about our hearts. All about our hearts. Jesus goes on to say there are two different ways of looking at the world, with a healthy or generous eye, or with an unhealthy or stingy eye. These two perspectives have been called an abundance mindset and a scarcity mindset. If you have an abundance mindset, you look out at the world and you see a world of abundance. You see God as your Father and provider, yourself as his child, and all of life as a gift. This is our Father's world, and it's got more than enough resources for everyone. And as a result, you live with gratitude toward God and generosity toward your neighbour. You receive and you give, both with joy. But if you have a scarcity mindset, you look out at the world and you see a world of lack. There's no Father provider. You're on your own. The world is a dangerous place in which we all face a fierce battle over scarce resources. So you need to look out for number one. Your vision is either focused on what you have but are scared you might lose, or what you don't have but you want. Your heart is consumed by fear and by greed. And significantly, two people can have the exact same income, cost of living and economic responsibility, but see the world in radically different ways, depending on whether they have an abundance or a scarcity mindset. Generosity is a practice by which we turn our hearts from a scarcity mentality to the abundance mentality of Jesus, from fear of lack to trust in God, our Father provider, from worry over our future to peace with whatever comes, from the endless desire for more to contentment with what we have, from grasping to gratitude and joy. If we come to trust Jesus' vision of abundance and God as our Father provider, then his teachings on money, such as don't worry, seek first the kingdom and give and it will be given to you, start to make sense, and we become free to be generous with what we have. But if we don't believe that, then the radical generosity of Jesus sounds not only foolish but risky, and we can become enslaved by fear and greed. This leads us on to the second point from Jesus' teaching on generosity. Watch out for greed. In Luke chapter 12, Jesus warns the crowds he's speaking to. Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Because the problem with greed is that it can become insatiable. Desire begets desire and we end up never having enough. There's always something more that we want. Today's advertising industry taps into that desire in people's hearts, such that we can even decide we want things we hadn't ever thought we wanted or needed until we saw the advert for them. So much money wouldn't be spent on advertising if it didn't work. And there are all kinds of greed, whether that be a materialistic desire for a bigger house, a newer car, the latest iPhone, for example, or a more bespoke kind of greed that's more about exotic travel, eating out, or high-end fashions. But the desire for more is not new. The human heart has long been prone to believe the myth that more will bring us happiness. As the writer of Ecclesiastes said, "Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income." Or as the oil tycoon Rockefeller famously responded when asked how much money is enough to make someone happy: just a little bit more. But how do we know if we're greedy? Most of us, I'm sure, don't think we are. It's rare in our churches for people to confess that they struggle with greed, because we tend to adopt the spending and lifestyle norms of our culture and think that because that's the way everyone around us is living, then seeking to accumulate all the things we have and want must be okay. It's just what we're entitled to because we've earned it, we've worked hard for it. But we live in one of the most greedy, materialistic cultures in history. So what's the answer? What's the antidote to greed? The antidote is generosity and finding contentment in what we have. Rather than constantly wanting to get more, we should seek to want less. As Paul writes in his letter to Timothy, but godliness with contentment is great gain. By this he means that true wealth is not having a lot, but being happy in God and content with what you have. To realise that you have enough and be happy with that. The problem is that so often we think we'll only be happy when we get what we want, rather than seeking to be happy in the here and now through the practice of generosity. Giving is God's antidote to greed, because the more we give away, the less control money has over our heart. But the other side of generosity is to also seek to simplify our lives to the essentials of what really matters to us. Simplicity is different from poverty. It's not about having nothing, but choosing to live with less, so that we limit the number of our possessions, expenses, activities, and so on, to a level where we are free to live joyfully and generously with Jesus. Rather than asking ourselves, what else can I get? We should perhaps instead start to ask ourselves, what can I do without? To live a generous life, we need margin in our finances. We need a schedule with room for interruptions for people in need and to allow us time for Sabbath rest and delight. Yet most of us live way above our capacity, not under it. So what can we do about this? One general rule for followers of Jesus practicing simplicity and generosity is that other people should look at how we spend our money, the cars we drive, the home we live in, how much we eat out, and so on, and they should assume we make less money than we actually do. If you imagine a line for your income, most people live at or over the line. We should seek instead to live under the line. But in order to do that, we might have to regularly practice the discipline of not buying things we can afford for ourselves, so that we have more to give away to those in need. And the other reason why we should seek to live generously and to want to acquire and hold on to less rather than more is that all we have belongs to God. All we have belongs to God. We are simply stewards or caretakers, entrusted by God to do good with the resources he has so generously given us. Yes, some of what we have is for us to live on, to provide the essentials of what we need and to enable us to enjoy life. God is a generous Father who wants to bless us. But what we have is not all for us to spend on ourselves. Some of it is for us to give away to the poor and needy, to the church, and for the sake of the gospel. As Paul writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, and God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. You will be enriched in every way, so that you can be generous on every occasion, and through us your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. God blesses us so that we can give more to others, not just have more for ourselves. Now, if this is true, then it means the question we should ask ourselves is less how much should I give, but more how much should I keep? What is an appropriate lifestyle for a follower of Jesus today? John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, preached and lived this to the full. He preached that Christians should not merely tithe, but should give away all their extra income once the family and creditors were taken care of. He believed that with increasing income, the Christian's standard of giving should increase, not their standard of living. He recalls that one year his income was £30 and his living expenses £28, so he had £2 to give away. The next year his income doubled, but he still lived on £28 and gave £32 away. In the third year his income jumped to £90. Again he lived on £28, giving 62 away. The fourth year he made £120, but lived again on 28 and gave 92 away to the poor. Even when his income rose into the thousands of pounds, he continued to live simply and gave his surplus money away. He told people that if at his death he had more than £10 in his possession, they could call him a robber. Now, the New Testament doesn't spell out to us how much we should give. Rather, in his letters to the Corinthian church, Paul offers us 6 basic guidelines for our giving. Our giving should be regular, not sporadic. It should be proportional. If you're barely able to fund your basic life necessities, you're still called to generosity, but it's going to look very different from if you have far more than you need to live on. Our giving should be sacrificial. There should be some things we want to buy for ourselves and don't in order to give generously to others. It should be voluntary. We shouldn't give reluctantly or under compulsion. And it should be joyful. God doesn't want grumpy money. He wants joyful gifts. And it should be motivated by our life of apprenticeship to Jesus, not by mere religious duty. Now, the lack of any clear rule to follow means that we each need to listen to God and to regularly come before him and ask him how much he wants us to use the resources, ask him how he wants us to use the resources he has blessed us with. The final point, which I'm just going to touch on very briefly, as Ruth talked about it a bit last month on Cap Sunday, is a call for us to be generous to the poor, to partner with God by being his hands and feet to those in need, as Uriana said. There are roughly 500 verses in the Bible on faith, and another 500 on prayer, but there are over 2,000 on God's heart for the poor. We see this heart on display in many of Jesus' teachings, and we read in Acts that members of the early church had everything in common and sold their property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. They practiced a life of radical generosity to the poor, to the extent that one of the main criticisms of the early church from pagan Romans was that they put the Roman world to shame by their generosity. Can the same be said for us? What more can we do to ensure that we as church and as individuals are known for our generosity to those in need? And how can we bring those we share our resources with into God's family? There's so much more that could be said about the practice of generosity. But to recap briefly, there's more joy in giving than receiving. We are to watch out for greed. All we have belongs to God, and we're called to be generous to the poor. And as with all the other practices we've looked at, we are called to start where we are, not where we're like to be, and we're called to give what we have, not what we don't have. But the key point underlying it all, is that our generosity should be wholehearted, an overflow of our response to God's love and generosity to us, not something we do grudgingly, just because we feel we should. Amen.